This week, as Donald Trump faces a possible indictment related to that very attack on January 6th, many Senate Republicans who also had to flee to safety that day are still out defending him. Senator Chris Murphy, the Democrat of Connecticut, was in the Capitol that day. He joins me now. Senator, good to see you in person. We get to talk a lot, but not often face to face.
Great to see you.
I will never not be fascinated by folks whose lives were endangered on January 6th by this mob. In many cases, we can clearly acknowledge, encouraged by President Trump, who don't seem to be able to want him to be held to account for that. Does any of what has happened this week surprise you? I mean, I thought at one point Republicans would take the exit ramp and say, all right, this is the second time he's had a federal indictment. This is really kind of crazy. We need to break with him.
Yeah, listen, I think you need to understand that there is a growing element of the Republican Party that is no longer supportive of democracy. They believe in their leader, right? They are part of this cult of personality, and they are willing to throw out democracy in order to keep their people and their guy in power. What was most extraordinary that day on January 6th is that after the attack was over, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, my colleagues had an opportunity to stand down to say, we're not going to inflame this movement by continuing our protest of an election that everybody knew was solid. And yet they went forward with their contest. And we still had to have a vote later that night to shut down the insurrectionist attempt by our colleagues. So I just think you have to understand that there are a bunch of Republican leaders, the vast majority, the vast minority of Republican senators, but really important guys in the party who actually are willing to get rid of democracy if that's what it takes to get Trump back in power.
I mean, look, in fairness to Mitch McConnell, he has been the best at generally distancing himself from Donald Trump or saying opaque things about how maybe Donald Trump is not the best guy to be the candidate. Why the thrall? Particularly with the United States senators who don't work on the same electoral cycles as the presidency. They have the ability. They're statewide elected. They've got a broader base generally. Why? We know why we see some of this in the House. It's structural. Why in the Senate do you have colleagues who do this?
Well, so listen, I think this is an opportunity for us to take a step back. Listen, everybody that stormed the Capitol, that violated the law, should be held accountable. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have a reckoning with the country as to why so many people are willing and were willing to throw out democracy and to essentially install an autocrat. Part of that is because there is a real unhappiness with democracy. There is a real belief that it has been used to protect the elites. And that doesn't excuse insurrection. That doesn't excuse political violence. But it is important for us to recognize that there is a growing number of Americans, almost all of them on the right, but a handful on the left, who are kind of ready to entertain other offers besides democracy because democracy isn't delivering. And that's a really important conversation for us to have.
Really important. Germany in 1933 was looking to embrace another offer. Italy under Mussolini was looking to embrace another offer. These are people who had the vote, who made choices for this. So there's a little bit of empathy coming out in you here, something that maybe some of our viewers are not willing to hear. What do you do about that? If what you're saying is true, does that feel like a reach out? What are you saying about people who are that frustrated that they would choose to overturn democracy?
Yeah, I don't have any empathy for people who chose to storm the Capitol on January 6th, but I also think it's a mistake for us to ignore the underlying causes of this unrest with democracy, because it exists not just with people who are engaging in political violence. It exists with a lot of folks who are never going to engage in that kind of activity, but may choose through the vote to throw out this form of government. And so that's frankly why this week I introduced a bill that sets up an office to study the epidemic of American social isolation and loneliness, because I bet you a lot of the people who are part of Trump's movement are really lonely people who have been unable to find positive identity and positive meaning because we've had the power of family and work and community atrophy. And so they're searching out for any meaning and identity they can find, and they find it often in really dark, dangerous places like demagogic movements, like the one led by Donald Trump. So I think we've got to start studying these sort of underlying anxieties in this country, like loneliness and isolation, trying to give people more positive connection, places where they can find friends and people to connect with. And I think that is one of the ways in which we prevent another January 6th.
Yeah, unfortunately, social media was apparently also going to find people friends who were otherwise thinking up conspiracy theories on their own. This is a good long-term solution. In between now and when what you're hoping to do gets done, we may have a presidential election in which Donald Trump gets stronger with each indictment, it seems.
Well, and listen, that's why in the short term, we do have to shore up our democracy, right? We have to move forward with laws to protect the right to vote and protect the ability to count the vote. We made a pretty good step forward at the end of the last Congress. We rewrote the Electoral Count Act, so some of the tricks that Trump and his lawyers tried to pull will be much less likely, and we can do more. So we need to walk and chew gum at the same time, try to address these long-term sources of American anxiety, the reasons that people are walking away from democracy, but also try to make it a lot harder for Trump and his allies to steal the election.
Is it your sense that it would be harder? Because Jamie Raskin said to us on Tuesday night, the best predictor of a successful coup is a failed coup. If Donald Trump gets elected, he had quite a speech on Saturday night in West Palm Beach where he talked about all the things he's going to do if you reelect him. Is it your sense that we're safer or not?
Well, I do think we're safer, in part because we have changed the laws, and it is just harder to get a state to send the wrong electors to Washington than it was prior to the change in law. But I also think we have a president who recognizes that by elevating the stakes on the question of democracy, he actually has a better chance of winning, right? A lot of people thought that Biden made a mistake at the end of the midterms when he went and gave that speech in Philadelphia on democracy being one of the key issues.
Seems like we apparently do care about this.
We do care about this, and I think Joe Biden is going to continue to make the 2024 election about the future of American democracy's survival. And in that way, I think we're safer because Biden gets that putting the stakes in that way actually serves to make it a lot harder for the race to be close enough for there to be any credible question.
You put forward two bills that talk about some very important social issues. I want to make sure we invite you back to have a good, thorough discussion on both of those things because I think they will help solve our problems. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Ali.
Good to see you.